Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress read-along. Once again, this is a video consisting of me reading forum posts from the Bay 12 Games forums. If you want to read these posts for yourself, the link is down below. And if you want my terrible voiceover and bad reading skills, keep watching. The first is a combination of questions, first from Immortal D, and they say, have you ever considered changing the lycanthrope Wareass to Weredonkey? I know it's technically correct, but thinking ahead of the Steam release, it might be best to just nip that in the bud, as it were. Also a question from Silverwing where they say, a side note, but it appears that demons and forgotten beasts made of vomit can also come about. Definitely a bit overly gross-out humor for the tone, don't you think? Tarn's response is, haha, yeah, well, we'll probably change it. I don't mind the vomit as an in-universe thing, but the donkey name would put those creatures in line with the naming convention for the domestic animal, and any future wild donkeys if we ever get those. I'm just gonna integrate my 2 cents and say that if they remove Wareass from the game, that will be my first mod that I seek out to create and hopefully get on the workshop, because we need to keep the Wareass around for all eternity. How else am I going to have a huge ass with no skin come by out of nowhere and shoot a bunch of fire or webs all over my dwarves? Seriously, it's a Dwarf Fortress classic. If you don't have that, like, what are you even doing? We have a quote from Winar, and they say, hello, I've been working on a game that relies strongly on procedural generation, and I have a few technical questions as to how Dwarf Fortress world generation works behind the scenes. First of all, how does each tile decide which biome to be a part of? My game uses a chunk-based system, and I have Voronoi diagram for assigning biomes. A Voronoi sample is done for each vertex of the chunk, and if there are any discrepancies, then a Voronoi sample is done on every tile. Secondly, how are erosion passes handled? I can't think of a way to do that wouldn't bleed over into nearby chunks. Finally, how is it decided where lakes and rivers start? I know that they just go downhill after being placed, but I'm not sure where to place these water features in the first place. Then Tarn's response is, well, it's definitely bleeding over into nearby chunks. We have a finite top-level world map, at most 257 by 257 in size, so that we can store these fields after generating them, and then do whatever we want with them, and then generate new fields when we zoom in, using these stored values as the edge seeds. Of course, you can't change the fields as easily once the game starts, since it'll spoil fractal generation for maps already made. But this is in World Gen, so it's okay. We run several fake river passes to erode the landscape, starting the rivers at the base of the mountain elevation and going into the sea. And there's also some running backwards up from the sea, if I recollect, since it helped smooth things out. After many, many passes that just change the landscape, but don't place water, there's a final pass with a starting points at the base of the mountains. Since so many erosion passes have been done, there's usually a pretty clear path to the sea at this time. So most of the rivers will succeed in finding ocean and be placed. There's possibly also a backwards process here, since it seems to help. But I don't recall exactly how lakes work. But it isn't something complicated like seeing where actual flat spaces or properly erodible places or flow blockages are. It might just expand from random points or something. I'm not too much more complicated than that. Though at some point rainfall in the basin is taken into consideration for low flood levels. I'm just gonna input here. Holy crap. Jesus Christ, Tarn. That's all. Moving on. Next question is about mods, and it comes in from Rekov, and they say, how complex would it be to restructure stockpiles to accept modded materials? For example, I can mod bone blocks into the game, but I can't add bone to the blocks and other materials menu in the stockpile options, and consequently, bone blocks aren't accepted. Could stockpiles theoretically be pushed into the raws, or would this require some kind of code that scans all of the reactions to see what can be made of what materials? And Tarn's response is, yeah, either solution is time-consuming, though I'm theoretically for doing something like that at some point. Putting it in the raws is probably the safest thing to do, since the first several incarnations of a scanner would likely miss stuff or add them to an inappropriate category at times. The sizers on the various stockpile fields forget where they are from, so the save compatibility would be a whole thing, and there are probably a few other issues. It can't be a raw-only solution because of the generated creature materials, etc. But it seems solvable in a not hopeless anyway. Well, at least it's a solvable problem. Next question comes in from Ear, and they say, ever thought about revamping the 3 main splash pages for the graphical release? They're talking about the website. And Tarn's response is, yeah. It would make sense to direct people to the Steam and itch pages more clearly. But the site definitely is also going to remain the home of classic DF as well as the old DF versions. It feels historically proper to keep some visuals of that in place. I really hope that all that they do to the website is maybe add just like a nice little Steam logo to the top left, top right, and maybe, or the top right, and same with an itch logo. Like, just make them clear, but like leave the website its old janky, archaic nightmare, because that's what gives it its charm. Let's be honest. The next question comes in from Delfonso, and they say, on a technical level, would you be willing, or perhaps as part of the Steam release, to build a DF for ARM architecture, mostly Raspberry Pis and other SBCs? No idea how much of a hassle that would be, but the latest RPis are at least powerful enough to run DF without immediately dying to FPS death. Tarn's response says, the Steam release will have enough trouble keeping the OSs that we have, and we're definitely going to jump those hurdles before adding new ones. I'm not sure how much of an extra support it will be, burden, and I don't know how much more of a burden I'll be able to take overall. TLDR, no, not anytime soon. I would just like to say that I spotted this first. Dibs, I saw it first. Anyway, Volley, lol, says, the new video of Zach playing a desert fort has a stone worker's workshop, seemingly instead of a mason's workshop. The workshop includes some tasks that reside in the Craftsdwarf's workshop in the currently available versions of DF, such as slabs and pedestals, but notably not the crafts. Does this mean that all these tasks will now be done by a mason, perhaps renamed to a stoneworker? And can that only be the common crafts, such as figurines and rings, and will stay in the stone crafters and craftsdwarfs workshop? Edit. And a question for Trito. In the desert fort, you locked a door between the fort and the caverns because monsters might come. Knowing building destroyers roam down there, that obviously won't work in the long run. Was this intentional to lead new players to discover the fun and anti-measures against it on their own, or do you simply play more open forts like that? Tarn's response is, we redid these stone jobs and names. The whole Mason thing has been bothering me for years and years. It's still not perfect, but I like it a lot better now. There are stone cutters and stone carvers and engravers and masons. Stoneworker is still at the top, is still the skill group word, like stoneworker and craftsdwarf or farmer. So it made the most sense for the shop. It could almost be called the stone carver's shop, but then the engraving for slabs would have to be done over at the crafts. And the slabs still felt hefty. I don't know. It could easily change our minds on this again, but at least they aren't masons. And he laughs. Stone cutters do the fortifications and the smoothing, while engravers still engrave walls and floors. Masons are just used for stone and building placement, but will likely involve them in a stone tile constructions at some point. And then the response from Trito, and he says, I will only tell you this because you are a committed fan asking questions for Futures of the Fortress. So, to tell you the truth, I actually saw a troll wandering down in the caves and was hoping it would wander to the door to break it down. First off, I just want to say that emojis on the Bay 12 forums are terrifying. Anyway, let's dive into this one. This question comes in from Coralito, and they say, thanks for all the effort you are doing. I have never felt so excited about a game. I have a doubt. I understand that videos so far are not going to be the final product. Are there any plans to add an option to enable/disable the flicker on dwarves and entities? I feel a little weird to see the sprites that don't have a characteristic flicker on them of the game. Especially, I feel that there are free feeling of movement when moving from one frame to another is missing. So I'm not sure if this person is asking about smooth movement or if this person is asking about the way emotions are displayed in Dwarf Fortress and whether or not a character is lying down, standing, or faint or anything. But Tarn addresses this, and he says, I don't understand this one. There is a characteristic flicker in the... Is there a characteristic flicker in the ASCII version? To me, the happy face symbols are on one tile, and then they are on another tile. And there is no flicker at all related to the movement or otherwise. And it works the same way in the Steam version. Whether or not there should be sliding movement in the graphical version is a different question, as I understand it. Things I can think of that are like flicker are the flashing legendary dwarves and the different symbols of animation when there are multiple creatures in a tile, and the status symbols that flash over them, but these things don't relate to movement. I think what this person is talking about, in the case of our question asker here, Coralito, is they're talking about smooth movement and dwarves moving from tile to tile. There is no flicker there, but I think that some people just genuinely aren't used to playing ASCII games. So when you ask somebody who's used to looking at ASCII, if ASCII looks strange to you, it's not going to look strange to you because you're used to seeing it. I don't know. This is, I think, one of those issues that people are just going to have to learn to deal with DF going forward, that even if they're not used to it, and it can be rough sometimes, but it just is what it is. The next one comes in from a fun name to say, Goto To To To, and they say, hey, not sure if this has been asked before, but will the map rewrite include being able to actually mod in structures? So instead of having to use something like cave_detailed or city in your entity file, you could be able to insert your own raw defined structure? And Tarn says, it is one of the more complicated things to take out of code, especially if you want to understand meaningfully what areas actually are. Sometimes a few nested layers of meaning /ownership/map and links, etc., rather than just creating a space that looks a certain way. We'll see with the editors and things how much progress we make. Although I don't think my site/dungeon maps are particularly good right now. Some of the generation is pretty complex and touches all sorts of pieces of the game. This would be difficult to capture in text format, and would require a pretty huge API, even for a scripting language, to get all the things queried by the code. But that doesn't mean we can't go further than just having a few tag types as we do now. God, that would be amazing. I'm just going to say, like, someone just, like, making a world just with, Helm's Deep in it. Or something like that. I don't know. That'd be cool. The next question comes in from Wareass, and they have a rapid fire of a few questions, starting off with, will the existing menus be polished by artists, or of what we've seen as the final product? ? Second one. What artists are currently working on the project? The UI feedback thread has been dead for months. Third question. Will the game have its own sound effects, or at least support for workshop mods to add them? I mean, effects of menu interactions and environment and unit sounds, etc. And then next, No Moria has a concept of darkness in caves being a source of monsters. This mechanic sucks and I hate it, I'm just saying. And thus making room making more demanding and purposeful. Same with cave-ins, as they seem to be rather rare. So I'm not incentivized to not make huge-ass 40 by 40 square rooms. Have you considered these, or perhaps other ways to make Fortress design more engaging as a game mechanic? Spawning monsters in dark rooms sucks. Don't ever do it, please. Then, what is your opinion about the Dwarf Fortress Light genre that seems to be blossoming? Do you consider these games to be competition to Dwarf Fortress? Last, have you /KitFox considered hiring a professional UX designer who would help find optimal solutions to the arguably quite challenging problems DF has to offer? I think I know the answer to most of these, but let's dive in. Tarn's response is, well, there's a lot of fresh placeholders that go in with the menus, produced by myself with paint, definitely not finalized. The artists are working a bit on plants and forgotten beasts, and cobs, I think you mean kobolds, cobes, and such. But we are definitely entered an in-between zone, such as I have much to do on the menu stuff, and at some point I won't be so far behind, and new art posts should pick up again. Sound plans aren't finalized yet, and I'm not sure if we'll be able to release with that much, since it's a production track we just don't have much capacity for currently. Though we have some event sounds that will likely end up with some menu sounds, and will likely end up with some menu sounds at least. I'm not sure if I'll set up the whole system in advance, to support non-vanilla sounds, since we might be able to add them in later, and we'd want to support sounds properly, which includes me taking cues from software and Fmod help from sound effects devs. And it would be best to have a rip out of another system with it would be best to not have to rip out another system with a bunch of existing mods in it. Yeah, I agree with that. The next is, we had some ideas about how to bring cave-ins back. Yeah, Lighting has some old thoughts, and I'm not sure how or when, if that's ever going to actually come up. Generally, we just don't have a lot of proper function to our locations. When they do have functions, like a dining room currently, and suddenly furniture placement and stuff matters. So as we make locations do more, and I mean more, it should help a lot. But that is a fairly long road. Next, I mean, if there's something called a Dwarf Fortress-like genre that I think can only be good for us. Though business and marketing stuff isn't my realm of expertise. I generally think it's only good things for them, although I'm personally getting really tired of games that are selling themselves off of the Dwarf Fortress name that are actually nothing like Dwarf Fortress. I'm looking at all of those games that are more like The Sims than Dwarf Fortress. Anyway, the last thing he says is getting a dedicated UX designer is the kind of the same issue with the sound stuff. We have some resources, but not a ton. Obviously, it's best to get people like that involved early, but it's just not in the cards. Kitfox can afford the artists and the music, but not a lot of full-time DF people, generally. There are ways to get more money, but that's been true for a while now, and we're using the approach that we're comfortable with. If the release goes well, adding UX people would be late, obviously, but then we'll have some additional options. At least some spare time. We're slowly expanding people and testing builds, and testing the builds with people... Wait, hold on. Testing the builds, people with various qualifications. Testing the builds people with various qualifications. That's an interesting way to write that. Anyway, I'm not anticipating a lot of sharp suggestions well before the release. At least beyond what we're already getting from the community, etc. This is just a me personal comment, and I realize I read that last bit terribly. I apologize. I'm not re-recording that. But why does everybody seem to think Tarn needs help? Just let the man make his game. Christ, what's wrong with all of you? The last one coming in is from Mr_Crabman, and it's a short one, thank God. And he says, are there plans to eventually expand on the senses, such as echolocation? More in-depth functional hearing, like Viper heat vision, etc. Right now, the extra vision tag seems like a sort of a crude prototype version of an echolocation in a way. And Tarn's response is, extra vision was a tag that made, example, undead with rotted eyes and unbroken. Although I don't remember the first context of its use. We'll likely just continue to add things as they come up. Also, echolocation would be awesome for in caves, like spelunking in adventure mode. I'm just saying. So that's all that we have for today. It's a little bit of a shorter one, although I think it ended up being around the normal length. Thank you very much, everybody, for watching this, and sorry if my reading was bad. That last one just got too long. It was my 4th time re-recording it, and I kind of gave up towards the end. But seriously, thank you very much for listening to these. As always, if you want to participate in these conversations, you can do so via the Bay 12 Games forums, and there's a link down in the description to this exact thread. These are monthly. Tarn does a Q&A on there, and I will do a video reading his responses, because people seem to like them and pester me to do them more. So I'm going to keep doing them more. And if you don't like it, I don't know, shove it. Thank you very much for watching, and to those of you who support all the work I do, some people have commented in the past that it seems like all I do is look at videos of screenshots and whatnot. I do a whole lot more than that. It's a lot of streaming over on Twitch, and I've been streaming full-time for 8 years, and I don't intend to stop anytime soon. This YouTube is kind of a side hustle for me. If you haven't, definitely give that interview that I did with the developer of Dungeon Mans a watch, because it's fantastic and not enough people have watched it. At least, I've been told it's fantastic, so thus it must be. My mom liked it. That's actually a fact. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this, and I'll see you in the next one.